There comes a moment when you realize that the very person who broke your heart also gave you the blueprint for how to move on without them. He taught you not through love but through neglect, not through presence but through absence. Every time he failed to show up, every time he dismissed your feelings, every time he chose silence instead of effort, he was training you to detach, to stop expecting, to stop waiting. And now you get to use those same lessons not to cling to him, but to release him. This time, you forget him with the same finality that he once forgot you. This time, you take his own behavior as the instruction manual for how to live without him. And when you do, you realize that the sweetest revenge isn't anger or bitterness. It's the strength to close the door once and for all, with no second chance, and never look back. He showed you how little effort meant everything to him, and that became the lesson you were never supposed to miss. When someone consistently gives you less than you deserve, it's not just an accident, it's a reflection of their priorities. Think back to the times you went out of your way to make him feel loved, to create memories, to remind him of his worth. And then remember how often he failed to match that energy. The unanswered texts, the plans that fell through because he couldn't be bothered, the way he treated your presence as if it was guaranteed, it all added up to one loud truth. Effort was never his language of love, and your value was never his focus. It hurts when someone teaches you a lesson through their neglect. Because in the beginning, you believe that love is about giving and forgiving. You tell yourself that he's just busy, that he's just stressed, that he'll come around. But over time, you start to see a pattern. Patterns don't lie. When someone consistently chooses not to show up, that choice is the message. And the message he gave you over and over is that your needs were optional while his comfort was essential. That's the reality you were living in, whether you wanted to admit it or not. Now, here's the shift. The same way he taught you that little effort was enough for him, you can turn that lesson back around and use it to your advantage. If he could forget your worth so easily, then you can forget his importance just as easily. If he could live without showing up for you, then you can live without showing up for him. What once felt like rejection becomes your training ground for detachment. What once hurt you becomes your strength. You start to see that his laziness wasn't about your value, it was about his capacity. He didn't lack lovable qualities in you, he lacked the ability or willingness to rise to the level you deserved. And that's not your flaw, it's his. Think about it this way, he handed you the playbook. Every time he gave you crumbs instead of a meal, every time he gave you excuses instead of effort, every time he gave you inconsistency instead of commitment, he was teaching you how to stop depending on him. He was showing you that you don't need his presence to feel whole. You were learning quietly that the very person you thought you couldn't live without was actually showing you how to let go. That's why when you finally decide to forget him, it isn't an act of cruelty, it's an act of alignment. You are simply applying the same rules he lived by. And here's the beauty. Once you shift your perspective, forgetting him becomes easier. You don't chase people who show you they don't care. You don't invest in someone who only ever gave you half of what you gave. You don't keep a place in your heart for someone who didn't even try to earn it. He gave you so little that he made it simple for you to detach. And now you take that truth and you run with it. You forget him not out of hate, but out of self-respect. You match his lack of effort with your lack of memory. You mirror back exactly what he taught you, indifference. This is why there's no second chance, because giving him another opportunity would mean ignoring the lessons he already taught you through his actions. He already showed you how much effort he thought you deserved, and the answer was not enough. So when you finally step back and say, "I'm done," you're not being cold, you're simply honoring the truth he gave you all along. He thought little effort was enough. Now he gets to see what it feels like when that little effort earns him nothing. That's the justice, that's the lesson, And that's the closure you needed all along. His silence was your lesson in detachment, though in the beginning it didn't feel like a lesson at all. It felt like rejection. You remember those nights when you waited for a reply that never came, the times you reached out with love only to be met with indifference, or worse, nothing at all. That silence cut deep because it made you question yourself. You wondered if you were too much, if you expected too much, if somehow you were the problem. But the truth is, silence is never neutral. It communicates just as loudly as words, and what his silence kept saying over and over is that your feelings weren't important enough for him to acknowledge. It's painful when the person you care about chooses avoidance instead of connection. His silence became his way of controlling the dynamic. By not responding, by not engaging, he left you in limbo, wanting, waiting, doubting. He probably knew you'd keep trying because your love was genuine and your heart was invested. And so, the silence became a tool. But what he didn't realize is that the very thing he used to disconnect you from him was the very thing that would eventually empower you to disconnect yourself. Because silence, though it hurts at first, eventually becomes familiar. You get used to the unanswered texts. You get used to the space he leaves. You get used to not relying on him for comfort or support. And slowly, without even noticing it, you begin to detach. You learn that you can go hours, then days, then weeks without hearing from him and still survive. What once made your heart ache starts to make you stronger. His silence, intended or not, was training you to stop depending on his words, his validation, his attention. And when you finally woke up to this, the clarity was undeniable. If silence was his choice, then detachment would be yours. Instead of waiting for him to show up, you start showing up for yourself. Instead of craving his responses, you start valuing your own peace. Instead of begging for attention, you start realizing that attention given reluctantly is never worth having in the first place. What once felt like abandonment becomes the doorway to independence. The lesson of his silence is that you don't need his voice to validate your worth. You don't need his acknowledgement to feel seen. You don't need his half-hearted engagement to feel loved. You begin to understand that love is supposed to sound like effort, like consistency, like care, and silence has no place in that. So when you decide to detach, it isn't out of bitterness. It's simply because you've outgrown the pain of waiting for someone who was never really going to answer. Detachment is not about becoming cold. It's about becoming wise. It's realizing that when someone shows you, through silence, how little they value connection, you don't keep asking for more. You don't keep trying to squeeze water from a stone. You accept the truth and walk away. And once you do, that silence loses its power over you. It no longer hurts. It simply confirms the decision you made. That's why forgetting him becomes easier. You're not forcing yourself to erase him. You're simply following the path his silence already set. He taught you, through every ignored call and every unanswered message, that he was okay without you. And now you teach yourself the same lesson. You are more than okay without him. His silence built the detachment, and your detachment is what frees you. So in the end, his silence wasn't just rejection. It was instruction. It taught you how to stop clinging, how to stop chasing, how to stop giving someone endless chances to meet you halfway when they had no intention of ever showing up. That lesson, though painful, is also priceless, because now you don't just detach from him. You detach from anyone who thinks love is shown by silence. And that is how his weapon becomes your wisdom, and his absence becomes your liberation. His absence proved you don't need him to breathe, even though at first it felt like the air had been sucked out of your lungs. When someone becomes such a constant part of your life, their sudden disappearance feels unbearable. You think you can't get through a day without hearing from them, can't fall asleep without their voice, can't imagine your future without their presence. That's the illusion love and attachment create. It convinces you that your survival is tied to another person. But here's what happens. Time passes, days turn into weeks, and slowly you realize the truth. You are still standing. You are still breathing. You are still here, and your life is still moving forward, with or without him. His absence, as much as it hurt, forced you to face yourself. When he was there, even in the most inconsistent way, he was still a distraction. He filled the empty spaces with just enough attention to keep you hooked. But when he stopped showing up, you had no choice but to lean on yourself. At first, the silence was deafening. Every moment without him felt like a void you didn't know how to fill. But little by little, you began to see that the void wasn't as permanent as it felt. You learned how to sit with it. You learned how to create your own comfort, and eventually you discovered that his absence wasn't proof of your weakness. It was proof of your strength. Because think about it, every single day you got up, went through the motions, and continued living was evidence that you don't need him to function. You may have missed him, you may have cried, you may have replayed memories in your mind, but you didn't stop breathing. You didn't stop existing, and over time, you didn't just exist, you started to grow. His absence made you rediscover the parts of yourself that had been neglected, while you were too busy trying to keep the relationship alive. You started pouring into your own dreams, your own passions, your own healing. You learned that self-love is oxygen, and once you began giving it to yourself, you realized you never truly needed his presence to begin with. That's the paradox of loss. In the beginning, it feels like the end of everything, but later, you look back and see it was the beginning of freedom. His absence stripped you of the illusion that you couldn't live without him. It forced you to see that love is a choice, not a necessity for survival. And once you see that, the grip of attachment starts to loosen. You stop begging the universe to bring him back because you understand that life goes on, and you're capable of going on with it. This realization is powerful because it's permanent. Once you know you can live without someone, you can never unknow it. That truth changes how you see love. It stops being about desperation or dependency, and it becomes about choice and value. You no longer need someone to feel whole. You simply choose people who add to your wholeness. And as for him, the man who thought his presence was your lifeline, his absence becomes the very thing that exposed the lie. He was never the oxygen. He was just a temporary breath. You are the one who keeps yourself alive. So his absence, which he might have assumed would break you, actually became the proof of your strength. You don't need him to breathe, and you never did. That truth is your liberation, and it's also his karma. Because while he lives with the illusion that he was irreplaceable, you live with the reality that you are unstoppable. His betrayal was the door to your boundaries, even though it didn't feel like that at the time. When betrayal first hits, it feels like the ground beneath you collapses. You question everything, your judgment, your worth, your ability to ever trust again. It feels unfair that someone you gave your heart to could turn around and treat it with such carelessness. But the deeper truth is this: betrayal is often the harshest but clearest teacher. It shows you exactly where your lines need to be drawn. It reveals the spaces where you once gave too much, tolerated too much, or ignored the warning signs. And though it hurts, it also awakens you to a new strength, the strength to create boundaries that protect you moving forward. When he betrayed you, whether through lies, disloyalty, neglect, or broken promises, he didn't just shatter your trust in him. He exposed the cracks in the foundation you had built with him, and that's when the lesson began. You realized that love without respect isn't love at all. You realized that someone can say the right words, but if their actions betray those words, the words mean nothing. Most importantly, you realized that trusting someone else can never mean abandoning trust in yourself. His betrayal wasn't just about him. It was about teaching you to honor your instincts, your needs, and your worth above all else. Boundaries often come from pain, and betrayal sharpens them in ways nothing else can. Before, you may have let things slide. You may have explained away behavior that made you uncomfortable. You may have given second and third chances because you believed in potential. But betrayal cuts through potential and leaves you with reality. And reality says, if someone is capable of hurting you once, they are capable of hurting you again. That doesn't mean you live in fear, but it does mean you live with wisdom. And wisdom tells you not to give someone the same opportunity to wound you twice. His betrayal forced you to ask the hard questions. What will I no longer accept? What behavior is non-negotiable for me? How do I protect myself from repeating this cycle? And those answers became the blueprint for your boundaries. You started realizing that love without honesty is manipulation, that attention without consistency is just distraction, that passion without commitment is chaos. You learned that your heart is valuable and not everyone deserves access to it. That realization is the gift betrayal leaves behind the clarity to never let someone cross those lines again. The beauty of boundaries is that they don't just protect you from people like him, they elevate the quality of people you allow into your life. Once you know where your limits are, you naturally attract those who respect them. You no longer settle for crumbs because betrayal taught you what it feels like to starve. You no longer tolerate dishonesty because betrayal showed you how much lies cost. You no longer confuse inconsistency with love because betrayal showed you the difference between words and actions. So while his betrayal may have felt like the end of everything, it was really the beginning of a stronger, wiser version of you. He taught you what not to accept. He taught you what it feels like to abandon yourself. And by doing so, he gave you the strength to promise yourself you'd never go through that again. His betrayal was the door, but your boundaries are the lock. You'll never let him pick again. And that's his karma. Because the version of you who once tolerated his behavior no longer exists. The new you, the one with boundaries, clarity, and self-respect, will never allow him back in. What he broke became the wall that shuts him out, and the door that opens you up to healthier, stronger love. His carelessness became the mirror of your worth, though in the beginning it felt like the opposite. When someone you love dismisses your feelings, forgets your needs, or treats your heart casually, it's easy to internalize that treatment. You start to think, maybe I'm not enough, maybe I'm asking for too much, maybe if I were different, he would try harder. But the truth is, his carelessness had nothing to do with your value and everything to do with his capacity or lack of it. The way he mishandled you wasn't proof of your inadequacy. It was proof that he wasn't capable of recognizing what was in front of him. And once you saw that clearly, his carelessness became the sharpest reminder that you were worth so much more. When he forgot important things, when he didn't listen, when he made you feel invisible, it stung because you were showing up with your whole heart. You were attentive, thoughtful, loyal. You were giving what you hoped to receive, and when it didn't come back, you took it personally. That's the trap carelessness creates. It convinces you to shrink your needs instead of realizing the other person is failing to meet them. But over time, the pattern became impossible to ignore. You realized that his lack of effort didn't mean you were too much. It meant he was giving too little. That shift in perspective is where the healing began. Every careless action, every broken promise, every time he let you down became data. It was proof not of your unworthiness, but of the mismatch between what you were offering and what he was capable of giving. Instead of lowering your standards, you started raising your awareness. His neglect forced you to look at yourself and ask, why am I accepting less than I deserve? Why am I equating his lack of care with my worth instead of with his choices? Those questions are uncomfortable, but they're powerful. They turn his carelessness into a mirror, not a mirror reflecting your flaws, but one reflecting your strength and the need to protect it. The beauty of this realization is that it flips the script. Instead of begging for his attention, you begin demanding your own. Instead of wondering why he didn't see your value, you start focusing on seeing it yourself. His carelessness highlighted the contrast between the love you gave and the love you received, and that contrast made it impossible to deny. You are irreplaceable, but he treated you as if you were replaceable, and that's the ultimate mistake, because here's the truth. People often don't recognize the treasure they have until it's gone. But you don't need to wait for his regret to prove your value. His carelessness already proved it, because when someone takes something rare for granted, the problem isn't with the treasure, it's with the one who failed to recognize it. He showed you, through every small dismissal, that you deserve more. He showed you, unintentionally, that you were loving at a higher level than he was capable of. And once you see that, you stop settling for less. His carelessness is his karma, because it pushed you toward clarity. It became the mirror that forced you to see yourself not as he treated you, but as you truly are. Someone loyal, loving, worthy of attention and care. And the moment you embraced that truth, the game changed. You no longer crave his validation because you already know he couldn't give it at the level you deserve. You no longer wait for him to wake up because you've already awakened yourself. So in the end, his carelessness didn't break you, it revealed you. It revealed your strength, your resilience, and your undeniable worth. And while he may one day look back and regret not cherishing what he had, you'll no longer need his recognition to feel complete. His carelessness was the mirror, but your reflection is the proof. You were always more than enough. No second chance is the justice he created for himself, even though in the beginning you may have wrestled with the temptation to forgive, to overlook, to hope that this time would be different. That's the pull of love. It convinces you to see the best in someone even when their actions have consistently shown you otherwise. But there comes a point where giving another chance isn't an act of love, it's an act of self-betrayal. And when you reach that point, the greatest justice you can give to yourself, and ironically, the greatest consequence he can face, is your refusal to open the door again. When someone breaks your trust once, it hurts. When they do it twice, it begins to redefine the entire relationship. You realize that the second chance wasn't a gift they cherished, it was a loophole they exploited. And that's when the truth sinks in. The problem isn't just their behavior, it's your willingness to keep allowing it. That's why closing the door, refusing to allow a repeat performance, is so powerful. It's not just about punishing him, it's about honoring yourself. Because every time you deny a second chance, you're telling yourself, my dignity matters more than his excuses. My peace matters more than his promises. My future matters more than his presence. He created this justice for himself the moment he showed you who he really was. The lies, the neglect, the betrayal, those were choices he made, and choices always carry consequences. In this case, the consequence isn't your anger, your tears, or your attention, it's your absence. That's what makes it justice. Because the very thing he took for granted is the thing he no longer has access to. He thought your forgiveness was unlimited, but he was wrong. He thought your patience had no end, but it did, and now he has to live with the reality that the door he carelessly walked out of is the one that will never open again. This isn't about bitterness or revenge. It's about clarity. Once you understand that giving someone endless chances only teaches them to disrespect you, you stop offering them. You stop negotiating with someone who already showed you they weren't willing to change, and when you stop, you reclaim your power. Because the real loss isn't yours, it's his. He lost the version of you that loved him deeply, that forgave easily, that hoped endlessly. He lost access to your heart, your presence, and your loyalty, And that loss is a far heavier consequence than any argument or confrontation could ever deliver. The beauty of saying no second chance is that it frees you. It frees you from waiting for him to change, from explaining your worth over and over, from repeating the cycle of hope and disappointment. It frees you to build a life where love is consistent, respect is non-negotiable, and care is mutual. And that freedom is the greatest justice of all, because it means his actions no longer dictate your story. He may have been the reason you learned this lesson, but he will never again be the one who decides your happiness. So yes, no second chance is harsh, but it's also fair. Fair to you, because you deserve to protect your heart. Fair to him, because he created the reality where forgiveness is no longer an option. And while he may one day wake up and realize what he lost, the door will already be closed. That is the justice he created for himself, the consequence of taking someone irreplaceable and treating them as if they were disposable. And the most powerful part, you don't need to enforce that justice with anger or resentment. Your silence, your absence, and your refusal to look back are more than enough. At the end of the day, forgetting him the way he taught you to isn't about hate, it's about liberation. It's about finally understanding that the lessons he thought would break you became the very tools that built you. His silence taught you strength. His betrayal gave you boundaries. His carelessness reflected your worth. And his choices wrote the ending for him: no second chance, no way back. You don't need to carry anger to move forward. You don't need to prove anything to him. The only proof that matters is in the life you now create without him. A life where you are no longer defined by what he failed to give, but by everything you give to yourself. That's the real victory. That's the real closure. Because the sweetest justice is not revenge, it's freedom. And freedom means this: you get to love again, trust again, live again, but this time without ever lowering your standards. He became the lesson, and you became the upgrade.